What is up, everybody? Welcome to yet another episode of Father Dynasty. I'm your fatherly host, Chew, here in the manhole, here to talk fatherhood, fantasy football, and everything in between. And I've got a very special guest with me today, and bear with me on this intro. It's a bit of a long one. He will diagnose a disease just as quick as he will diagnose a fantasy football sleeper. And he is known in some circles as the Chaos Coordinator. Follow him on Twitter at Dr. Vig and catch him on multiple fantasy football shows with his co-host Alfredo Brown. And last but not least, catch him in his lab coat at The Ohio State as the Associate Program Director of Internal Medicine Pediatrics Residency Program, Dr. Vignesh Swami. I can't breathe anymore. How are you doing, buddy?
Fantastic. You can call me Vig, as should most everyone else. That is an impressive job. First off, always love the intro music and how your voice is just like that soothing voice that goes with that kind of music. But yeah, you did a really good job figuring out a lot of stuff for my Twitter. That Chaos Coordinator post was from like a while ago. I am extraordinarily impressed with your ability to figure all that out just from my Twitter.
I'm a fantasy football sleuth, and I've learned that sleuth is not an inappropriate word. It actually has a nice meaning. So yeah.
No, fantastic sleuthing there, if I may say so myself.
Much appreciated. Well, if I don't want to be too forward, are you ready for a keep, trade, cut?
Absolutely. It's what we do all the time, right? Keep, trade, cut.
Let's dive in.
So I have to choose my favorite. I'm going to keep.
Oh, dear. I will trade.
This is kind of wild.
The cut is easy, and it's the last one.
You will very much know one of those voices in there as your co-host in crime. Keep, trade, cut. Everyone in the fantasy football community knows about it. Probably half of them hate it. It is the trade tool that kind of lets you know who you want to keep, trade, and cut in terms of value. What I do here is every guest gets their own unique keep, trade, cut with 3 topics very specific to them. Hopefully it makes us sweat a little bit, but not too much. So are you ready?
I as ready as I can be.
There we go. Well, topic number 1, is there a doctor in the house? And it might not be what you're thinking. This is 3 fictional doctors I want you to rank as keep, trade, cut. So first off, Doctor Strange, a neurosurgeon, of course, in the Marvel universe. Dr. No, I don't know what his doctorate is in, but he is, of course, in the James Bond 007 arena. And third, near and dear to your heart, Dr. Cox, senior attending physician of Sacred Heart from the show Scrubs. So what do you got?
Easy. Got to keep Dr. Cox. Anything related to Scrubs is staying. So Dr. Cox is a keep. I'll trade Dr. Strange. I think his value, I'm selling him a little bit on a low. Could have sold him at the end of the, end of Avengers Assemble would have been high, but at this point, but mostly just saying this because I'm going to cut Dr. No. Nothing against that movie, but it was the OG James Bond villain, right? The very first one. And it was just so long ago that at this point, I mean, it just has historical value. So not as cool to people. So at least that's my reasoning for now. That was a slightly tougher one than I expected.
And no one knows Dr. No. Honestly, when I picked him, I was like, I know he knows. I'm going to stop using different types of no. But I was like, it's not, front of mind in the James Bond arena, but I'm just trying to think of my fictional doctors. And aside from picking all of Scrubs characters, that's kind of had to go there. So
no, that was a good one, I think. And I think, I've seen the Dr. No movie, and I'm going to go with my wife's reasoning here. In a land of 4K and 1080p, my wife just can't watch some of that old stuff anymore. She's like, it's so grainy.
That's true. It is kind of funny when you blast that up on a bigger. Yeah. I mean, the fact that we can get like 70-inch TVs now, and it's like a feeble person can carry it. And I have a very old school, like probably 40-something inch TV that it might be 350 pounds. I just got it for free, and it's up there. It's ridiculous, but
yeah, no, I think that's the way to do it. I think the way in this case is to put Dr. No on a nice HD TV and take a look. And if you can bear to watch it, maybe you can keep or trade. But yeah, it was a relatively easy cut decision for me.
Right. Well, I don't know if I can bear to watch you pick these. So topic 2 is favorite of your favorites. This one's tough. This one's always tough. And the third one might actually throw you for a loop here. So first, and you rep it proudly, not today. That would be the second team here. The Arsenal Football Club. That's first. Second, of course, is your Fred Taylor-led Jacksonville Jaguars. Third, real curveball, your Ohio State residents.
Oh, this is like totally unfair. If any of them ever catch this show, I'm fired.
If it makes you feel any better, I doubt they watch it.
Well, they may, you never know. So here's the truth. Sports is fantastic. Love Arsenal, love the Jaguars. My life has revolved around these things for as long as I can imagine. But if there's anything more real than this, it's my role as an educator. So I think I have to keep the residents. They work really hard. They are truly, they are a often underthanked, underpaid group of people who work so hard to learn and to take care of our patients. I got to keep them. To cut the Jaguars. Hate to do this. I mean, I'm literally have Burnell hanging there, and I'm wearing like a '90s era Fred Taylor jersey for the show. But the Jaguars are disappointing a little bit at the moment. We just lost to the Texans, who like didn't even win a game. They were 0-3-1. So I'll cut the Jaguars because I can't even trade them. Who's going to pick up the Jags? Like I whenever I meet people, my intros, hey, yeah, and I'm a Jags fan. Now you've met like 10% of the entire fandom, and then I will trade. I will trade Arsenal, who is currently riding high at the highest of highs that will ever be. We're at the top of the Premier League, but Erling Haaland and the rest of his AI-powered robot squad over at Manchester City is probably going to win the league this year. So there you go. I will keep my residents, who are the absolute wonderful human beings that they are. I will trade Arsenal at the highest of high, probably the most I'll ever get for them. And sadly, can't believe you made me do this. I will cut the Jaguars.
No, I understand. And I will say, so what came first for you in terms of sports? Was it Arsenal and the beautiful game of soccer or football, or American football and the Jaguars?
The Jaguars came first, to tell you the truth. So I moved to Jacksonville the year before they had a football team, and I was caught up in the new. Well, there's no other teams in Jacksonville, but caught up in all of that. I didn't really start watching soccer. And remember watching soccer, I would say, until like the 1998 World Cup. And around then is when I started watching Arsenal too. So gotcha. Arsenal came a little later.
Nice. Well, I'll say two storied franchises, right? There you go.
So that's one way to put it. Two storied franchises.
Well, I definitely understand. I have a pretty scattered sports team in terms of all of their locations. A couple of them have had their good years, and other ones are the Carolina Panthers. But I digress. We'll move on to the third topic, and this one is Vig and Alfredo. And I'll be gentle with this one, but these are all things kind of related to, say, your relationship with Vig and Alfredo on the screen, if you will.
Sure.
So we've got Alfredo's dislike for your stellar dad jokes, his bevy of creative nicknames for you, and third, and this is very recent, of course, calling your football team the Arsenal Cannons.
We will cut the Arsenal Cannons. That is very easy. That was a poor choice by Alfredo. He was trying to emulate my hilarious dad jokes, but he was wrong. But no, that's easy to cut because I think I'll trade the nicknames. They are fantastic. He has 100 different alliteration nicknames for me, and their value is sky high right now. I could trade those nicknames for something probably pretty good. It's like Dynasty, right? It's like trading Saquon Barkley in Dynasty right now. No one would do it, but if you did, you're going to get a lot. So I'll trade that. And then I will keep, what was the first one? Alfredo.
The dad jokes.
Oh, the dad jokes. Yeah, I got to keep the dad jokes. That was easy. The dad jokes make me who I am. It's obviously the number one reason why people ever listen to anything in the show. Far more superior than any of our like really great fantasy football knowledge is my fantastic puns and dad jokes. Plus, this is the Father Dynasty podcast, and if I was not going to pick the dad jokes, I would have disappointed you, Father Chu. So I can't do that.
Wow. I've never been called Father Chu, but
I wanted to try it out.
I love it. And honestly, with the nickname Chu, it's rare that I get one that kind of goes like the one that I haven't heard. Literally never heard it, so I love it. Well, the last one here, this is a bonus.
Ooh, I have a bonus. Okay.
Yes. So when this podcast for the last month was actually in my basement as we were doing some renovations in the house, it was a bit easier to kind of wrap your mind around. So we have a bunch of movie posters down in the basement. So I'll give you the example of what our 7 are between my wife and I, but what would be 3 movie posters if no one in your household got to veto you, you got to pick all 3 of them, would you have up? And just to give you a heads up, my wife has Pretty Woman, Harry Potter, and Mean Girls. And then I went a little more macho with Anchorman, Boondock Saints, Jaws, and Goldfinger.
Okay. So I got to give you 3, huh?
Yeah, it's a mixture of like kind of the visual of like some look better than others, but there's also some that are maybe classic. Like that's kind of why I went Jaws, because that's, the visual appeal of Jaws is great there.
The problem is like every movie poster these days is the exact same thing, right? You got your central characters who are like big, and you got a couple of side characters, and then down on the bottom you got like the 4 or 5 more characters. That's like every Marvel movie poster.
True.
So I will say I have to have a Lord of the Rings poster of some kind. Absolutely fantastic tale, a movie that did the books justice in its own way. I have to have something science fiction, and I think I'll go with Dune.
Oh, nice.
I don't even know what that poster looks like, but Dune is like the greatest audiobook I've ever had. It was like the first entry into science fiction for me, and the movie is absolutely stunning by Denis Villeneuve. And then a third one. I mean, I'm really a science fiction and fantasy guy, but I also love, Anchorman's a great choice. You really put me on the spot. I wasn't prepared for this bonus. Oh man, I don't even know. I think I'll go with these two. Mostly they were the first two that came to mind. Kind of embarrassing. Lots to go. Well, you know what? I think I can't not have something related to Star Wars. Such a formative part of my childhood. So I think maybe The Empire Strikes Back. I'll go with that one.
Okay. Yeah, that's the tricky thing, is kind of thinking about when we were kind of discussing that for our basement, trying to figure out what it would be. Admittedly, I have like another 7 that I would want myself would want to put up. I mean, I like Mortal Kombat. I like I'm a big X-Men fan. So like very much, I guess, in the sci-fi realm too. There's so many things that I feel like visually would look good. Might make me look like a nerd, but that's perfectly fine.
I'm a nerd. I think we have to just accept that we're nerds, fantasy football nerds, sports nerds. It just comes with the territory.
Yeah, and people just have to deal with it. So, well, you came through unscathed. You made it through Keep Trade Cut. Hey.
I don't know if I'm unscathed, but I made it.
Aside from cutting your Jags, you did keep your residents, though. I know they will appreciate that. So
I hope they do.
Well, jumping over to kind of some questions just about you. So, was being doctor always the plan? When did that kind of become kind of a part of your life, and maybe what was your best experience thus far being a doctor?
So that's a tough question. I don't know if being a doctor was always the plan. I think what I wanted to do, I'll tell you this. I kind of liked all sorts of things, right? I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to be an educator or a teacher for sure, like high school math, college physics. That was like one of the dreams. Really loved the idea of being like a detective. Or like all the just piecing together puzzles and like clues and putting it together. And I loved science, wanted to be like a scientist and like, work in labs and stuff. And so then I realized that I could do 3 of these in medicine, right? Like as I'm a teacher and assistant professor at the College of Medicine here. And obviously I teach, graduate medical education, so residents. I teach my patients all the time, how often do you get a good explanation of what's going on in like simple terms? I often felt overwhelmed. Doctors would say all these things in Latin for no reason. So medicine allowed me to be a scientist, educator, a scientist and educator, and it allowed me to really be a detective at the end of the day. That's what we're doing, especially what I do in hospital medicine, which is take care of folks who are hospitalized, is putting together a bunch of clues and trying to figure out what's going on. So kind of let me do all of them. I am admittedly a very, very failed astronaut. But yeah, you never know, depending on how cheap space travel becomes, maybe I could be a space doctor one day.
I think, whether you want to put it on a business card, maybe pop it on your Twitter bio, you just say space doctor and
future space doctor. Love it.
Oh man. Yeah. So that's what I've always wondered. I mean, that is interesting that you kind of mentioned all those different things in a way of like, instead of looking at each of them singularly, you kind of looked at like, well, what can I do that I feel like feeds so many of those wants and so many of those desires? And maybe, if anything, because you picked something like being a doctor that kind of like gets so many of those things, I feel like that keeps you engaged and involved, because it's not just one thing you're enjoying so many facets of it that day to day, you're learning, you're teaching, you're able to kind of solve those problems as you will. So
100%. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Well, how would you say being a doctor has influenced your perspective in fantasy football?
What a fantastic question. Wow. So you would be surprised at how much it's influenced how I like go through fantasy football. I've been playing fantasy football like many folks since maybe like college, high school. So for me, it's been like over 15, 16 years now. Initially really just picked players I liked. There wasn't as much thought process. Try to get a lot of Jaguars. When the Jags were on a bye week, I just ate the L. It's okay. That's how I did it. Because I think I played a little bit with my dad even. So like going back to like elementary school, that's when I picked all the Jags, which was okay because they were good. Keenan McCardell, Jimmy Smith, Mark Brunell, Fred Taylor. They had some fantasy weapons. We'd look up the scores on like the newspaper and be like, oh, that's really good. But here's what a lot of stuff that we need to do in medicine. A lot of what I do in medicine that translates over to fantasy football is, I have to weigh the risks and benefits, and I try to mitigate risk as much as possible, right? So, Alfredo and I often talk about going for that safe floor player and not always just shooting for the upside, like trying to get that safe floor with a high upside kind of player, like a CMC or a Barkley kind of person, right? Or a Cooper Kupp, a guy who could blow up at any time, but always gives you a floor. Now, same thing we do in medicine. So I've definitely moved a lot towards not being such a boom bust guy. I used to be like the guy who'd reach in round 3 for someone who I probably shouldn't have. Lots of medicine is also a lot of what I do is critical appraisal of the medical literature. So analysis of data, like just large volumes of data and trying to make sense of it all using like advanced biostatistics and stuff. And I'm not saying that I do that for fantasy football, but I think that analytics is such a huge part of what a lot of us do in fantasy football, of course. And I think that I very much have an analytical mind. If anything, in the whole like film versus analytics debate, a version of me a few years ago probably would have said analytics because I do a lot of that in medicine. But people often talk about that film versus analytics debate. And I will say that I love watching film. It's something Alfredo as a former scout really got me onto. And like looking at the all 22, watching what happens for each player for the same play multiple times to try to get a better idea. It's made me a smarter football watcher, I'd say. Like I get more out of watching it. It's kind of like when Tony Romo would give you commentary.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm a smarter watcher of football now. So I did that. But when we like see patients, one of the things I teach a lot of is like clinical reasoning and like looking at the patient, doing a really good physical exam, being attentive to minor details here and there to like helping figure out exactly what's going on with the patient. Cause you can be so reliant on labs and scans, but part of my teaching is really, let's provide high value care. Let's try to make the diagnosis as much as possible without ordering labs and scans and poking patients and radiating them with, for x-rays, all that sort of stuff. So all in all, that's a fantastic question. I think, whether it's the analytics and doing the data, which I do in medicine and in fantasy football, or the watching film in football, which I'm correlating with doing the physical exam, or the third thing, which is really the first thing I said that I completely forgot. Risk mitigation, right? Like obviously just say, weighing the risk versus benefits. I think like being a physician has really affected how I approach fantasy football too, which is kind of cool. And obviously I spent a lot of time being a sports injury, meaning I've gotten a lot of injuries and surgeries myself now, but also I think knowing a little bit more about like the rehab process, what these injuries mean, having an avid interest in like sports medicine since even before I started medical school obviously helps out too. And that's sort of the angle that Alfredo likes to take on the show. But no, what a great question. I never really considered it till you asked.
Well, no, that was, one thing that it kind of tuned me into you guys. I think one of the first episodes that I had seen of you and Alfredo on the Pretend GM, it was specifically related to injuries in some way, but the way it was spoken about kind of through each of your lenses and it was kind of brought together, of course, in the summary at the end. It was a very intelligent way of kind of saying like, you have a view, certainly from as a doctor and as a physician, and Alfredo has a view of, as a scout and everything. But there's a way that you can kind of meld those together. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to literally be, you only think that and he only thinks that. You both have, perspective of trying to bring it all together yourselves, but being able to talk very intelligibly on each side and kind of bring it together, I think was kind of what set you guys apart in terms of certainly your rapport and everything, but also just kind of each of your perspectives on fantasy football as a whole.
No, cool, man. Yeah, I never really thought about it that way, but I agree. Sometimes, I don't want people to just think of Alfredo as like a scout who only does film stuff. Alfredo actually is like extraordinarily brilliant at all of this. Not surprised that he's been in the top 10 accuracy for Fantasy Pros for the last 2 weeks. A little shout out there. But no, he really is very, very good at this sort of stuff. But I don't think about things purely from an injury. It's not like a healthy player means nothing to me and I'm not paying attention to it. I've learned a lot from, fantastic folks on Twitter and elsewhere. And, we've all got our sources over the year, but also just learned a lot from Alfredo and learned a lot from just doing this for like a decade and a half. I realized that I've kind of played fantasy football for longer than I've done. I mean, I've done that for longer than I've been in medicine.
Oh, wow. Hey, that doesn't mean we don't trust you as a doctor. We still trust you. Well, speaking of Alfredo, how did you guys kind of connect and then ultimately kind of start that first iteration of the Pretend GM?
So Alfredo and I have known each other since the dude started college. I was his orientation advisor. You have a student who gives you the college tour, is in a small group. They help you pick your first classes and all that sort of stuff. At least that's what we had at FIU. And that's how I met him. I was his orientation advisor. We became friends pretty quickly. I've known him forever. He's been a part of so many group chats. We went to like the bowl games together. FIU hasn't had a ton of them. But I've really known him forever. And I'll be honest, this is a little plug for Alfredo, of course. Like, my dream is for Alfredo to get like a really fantastic full-time job as like a host or someone in front of camera in the fantasy football industry, because he's so good at this, good at the fantasy football stuff, but also being a host. He's kind of great. And so he was like, I'm going to do this show. And he had done like a few solo episodes and stuff. And it's sort of hard to talk to yourself. Like, I couldn't do this if you weren't here and if I wasn't seeing your face here. And so Alfredo was like, Vig, you want to do this with me? We play fantasy football for a long time together. We have a good rapport. You have bad dad jokes. You are great with puns. Like, I think this could be good. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm not good at this stuff. Like, you do not want me in front of a camera or with a microphone in front of me. But anyway, it worked out. And here we are. That's really the real story. And to be honest, if you came to me like in the middle of the pandemic at a time where my life was consumed with medicine and all the stuff that was happening with just, with the pandemic and seeing patient after, I was pretty much like a COVID doc for like months on end. This was like pre-vaccine. So folks were like lots of sick folks, and so it was like a great escape for me to, spend an hour a week with one of my best friends talking about football. So, this is a great, sorry, I have a bad word. Great questions.
No, I'm always interested in just kind of, hearing. I think one thing you don't necessarily always hear about from the fantasy football content creator kind of space is once you're in season, you're plugging along. And then even in the off season, really, it's just you're trying to just get some rest and reboot and kind of do all your behind the scenes stuff to get ready for next season. But at the end of the day, like anyone that's in the space, whether you're, really deep in it and, high on the list or just kind of starting out, everyone kind of has their reason for why they did it or, who they're working with or why they're working with them. And I think that's kind of the nuts and bolts of what makes these shows great is hearing about, when people met, why they chose to start a show, their perspectives on things and why it makes your guys' show so great and so many so great. So
thanks, man. But absolutely, what I've listened to your show before, obviously, and I've like heard, I specifically remember the one with Alfredo. What I didn't realize is how much research and sleuthing you do to learn about people. Like you ask these good questions and stuff, but I think that I just kind of assumed those were things everyone kind of knew and stuff. But until today, I didn't like really realize how much you do to figure these things out. I really appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. No, if you're a guest on the podcast, I want you to feel right at home. I know you're in your own home, which is why you're comfortable.
Home. Yeah.
Yes, I didn't get a Mark Brunell jersey in enough time. It was going to be a Washington one, but you're going to be like, no, that's not my team. What are you doing? So
hey, he did play. He played for them. I wouldn't have been that upset if you had a Packers Brunell or like a Commanders Brunell. I guess it was like the Redskins.
He played
Brunell
for the Packers too.
He was actually Brett Favre's backup before we snuck him away. Okay. Yeah.
That's very ironic that Brett Favre was in Atlanta, jumps to Green Bay, and then Brunell was again, Brunell and Favre are the same guy. I know that. Oh man, well, we've kind of bounced back and forth in terms of you talking about, your experience in your life as a doctor, both and also in the fantasy space. So what would be maybe a key point of advice that you give kind of one of each? So those aspiring doctors or physicians, or those people, thinking to get into the fantasy space, and just a piece of advice for each of those.
Oh, this is a good one. I don't necessarily consider myself like anywhere in the fantasy football content creation space. Honestly, Alfredo does all the work. I just show up and look pretty and give you great dad jokes and puns. And that's not even a joke. Like, he really does do all the work. I just kind of show up. I mean, I help with the research stuff and stuff too, of course. But even there, Alfredo like does the big chunk. So I don't know that like I'm the best to give like advice about that. But here's what I will say. I've now gone to the expo a couple of times over the last 2 years. I have interacted with so many wonderful and kind people like you, Father Chew. I'm sticking with the Father Chew thing. You know, the people here are just very kind. Like, it doesn't matter if your show has a single viewer, as Alfredo's show did initially, or 40,000 views, as I cannot believe 40,000 people. I mean, 10,000 of it was probably just me and Alfredo watch like one of our more recent. But doesn't matter how many, or hundreds of thousands or millions. I'm not even sure how many the ballers get, but like, this is such a kind and welcoming space. And if you want to do something and you want to have fun doing it, just like ask anyone for advice. People will give you like advice on like ring lights and microphones and like a setup like yours, for example. The manhole setup looks fantastic. Way better than my medical school diploma that's sitting behind me on the ground and my Mark Brunell that's hanging from, but people will give you so much advice. They're very kind. Yes, there's negativity in this space like there can be in everything else. I would just say, forget that. That's what the mute button's for. The block is for. Be around, hang out with the nice people. Ask them. People will tell you what to do. Ask me. I'll point you in the direction of smart people. And for medicine, I would say the same thing. Just, medicine can be tough to get into. It is more and more competitive every year just because people really want to go into medicine. I will say, if you're thinking about going into it at all for the money, probably a really bad idea. Med school is super expensive. I owe Uncle Sam let's just say I owe Uncle Sam way more than $250,000. But I'm thankful for I'm thankful to Uncle Sam for helping me get to med school. People can't pay that much to get to med school. So don't do it for the money. If you really enjoy a long road where you may not have a real job until you're 30 plus years old, as I practically was when I had like my first supervising physician job, and you really enjoy what medicine does, and what you can do in medicine, then go for it. And my advice would just be, if you choose that road and you're down that path, don't forget everything else that brings you joy. It can be so easy to get caught up in everything that medicine makes you do. Like you're convinced to thinking that you have to do research and you have to volunteer all the time, and that you're not allowed to have any free time to do things that, that re-energize you or recharge you. And that's what I would say. Make sure you focus on what gives you wellness and what makes you happy and what brings you joy. And as long as you do that, you'll be a fantastic doctor.
I really like that answer. I think, I don't know whether it's the connotation or not of just the busy schedules and kind of the erratic schedules and the long hours of, being a doctor. And not to say that isn't very much the case. But it's nice to hear, like you even said, during the pandemic, that was somewhat of the birth of the Pretend GM with you joining Alfredo, just to have a chance to kind of separate a little bit from, again, what was still very much in the background for you, but you got a chance to just step away. And even if it was just for an hour or so, be able to hop on the camera and, see your buddy. I know that it's not like you guys are right next door, so you're getting a chance to, see face to face and talk fantasy football, dad jokes. Again, you got to show your pretty face. So he's thankful that you did that. So
I know he does not get to see a face as handsome as this often. So whenever he does, I know truly brings him joy.
Oh man, well, and you had mentioned the FF Expo. So how many years have you been able to attend now?
Just the last two, 2022 and 2021. And honestly, like Pretend GM started, I think in the spring of 21, we had like 3 episodes recorded before we went out there, maybe 3 or 4 before we went to the expo. So yeah, 2 years in a row. And every year it's even more fun. Again, the people are just fantastic. Like you meet people like Pat Fitzmaurice and Kevin Coleman and like Kelly Singh, Kelly and Phoenix and Scott Fish. And all these people are like such huge names. And I could give you so many more. And they're like so nice. They'll be like, "Hey, Vig, what's up? How you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." And it's not like just a cursory thing. Like, Scott Fish sat and talked to me for like 5 minutes that first year, and he has zero idea who I am. He's just nice people all around. And I think that's what brings me back. I'll be honest, as much as I love football, I've had issues with like myself being a fan of the sport. given, its handling of a lot of different issues and like CTE, like how they handle that and the whole concussion stuff. And sometimes you're like, man, am I supporting something that's not so great? But then I see the community, and that's what always brings me back. People are just so kind. People like you, Father Chu, just so kind and welcoming and always wanting to bring other people up that I don't know that I can stay away. I love being around this wholesomeness.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. It's something that I guess, like, honestly, everyone I've spoken to on this podcast that has played fantasy football, they likely have been doing it for a decade plus. And it's something where, whether they're, I guess, in the content game or not, it's been something that's, regardless of their job, their day job, it's always kind of, that thing that they connect to, whether it's just redraft, that's that one time a year, your work buddies get together, your buddies from back home. It's Dynasty, so you're just nonstop trying to do trades, 12 months out of the year. I'm sorry to my commissioner. He doesn't get paid for all the trades he has to execute for me. But yeah, I'm very much looking forward. I will be at the FF Expo next year.
Let's go.
And
finally.
And we're going to rage. So I think I'd said on Twitter, you guys have a couple of tequila shots for me. So I will be taking them next year. So looking forward to that.
I am so excited. This is the best news all day. This is fantastic. Now you have an almost 4-year-old. Do we get to meet this young man? He'll be almost 5 next year.
That's right. He will. Yeah, he'll be 4 November 3rd, and we might be a Chuck E. Cheese. I'm not quite sure yet. Okay. That's what he believes is going to happen. So we probably have to do it.
Yeah, at least for a little bit.
Yeah, but I say he was on a previous episode. I'm going to keep bringing him back as much as I can. It's hard to corral him for any more than 3 minutes and 30 seconds in this chair.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, what I meant was like, are you going to bring him to the expo? There are lots of people that bring their kids. There's like a big outdoor space where there's like outdoor, that first evening they do outdoors like games and cornhole and throw a football around. And,
okay.
And then the actual expo day itself is down in the huge hall full of like games, some people playing Madden, and even like day 2 or 3. I'm trying to think. There's like the day at the Hall of Fame. It's just an entire day at the Hall of Fame football field, and people are throwing footballs around. There's a quarterback challenge. There was this one kid, and I say kid, he was probably like 10 years old, just destroying all of us in the QB challenge. And it's nice and outdoor. So just not saying you have to, but just throwing it out there that there are other folks who bring kids, and it might not be the worst sort of experience for a kid either.
Noted. Well, I mean, I don't know how he compares, but he's got a cannon on him. He's just not. It sometimes goes backwards. It sometimes is a line drive directly where it shouldn't be at me. So
just like the Arsenal cannons.
That's exactly right, and that's what you call a callback right there. Oh man. Well, Vig, I have sincerely appreciated you coming on, talking fantasy football, talking you being a doctor, and just all good things in life. So, guest does always get the last word though. And I'll kind of lay it out. So, you get a shout out, a quote, a cheers. I've added this one recently. You can also have a diss if you're really, if someone's just, grinding your gears, you let them know about it. So what do you got?
All right. My diss is going to be you if you don't show up at the expo next year. So it's a future diss. Fair. Just so you know. So if you're not there, that's the diss. Because I really don't like diss, but I feel like that's a fair one. Shout out, man, can I shout out Alfredo anymore? He's like a wonderful human and does a really fantastic job. You should follow him. Not only is he like, top 10 for the last couple of weeks at like expert rankings, not only does he like do all of our stuff for our show, the editing, the sounds and everything. He's honestly like a really great guy. And if you want to get better at fantasy football and learn the process, because like what we do on that show is teach, right? He's a great person to do. And as you've learned, I can only remember 2 out of 3 things always. What was the third thing again?
Oh, let's see. It was a shout out, a quote, a cheers. So kind of, any of those.
Okay, yeah. We'll give him a shout out, and then I think the quote will be Arsenal Cannons is such a great quote. I gotta say Arsenal Cannons by Father Chu. Like sounds like a great book or something.
Oh, I love it. Well, no, Vig, I appreciate you coming on. I know you were fresh off your shift, but you put on your Jaguars gear, you had your Brunello behind you, and you're ready to go.
Absolutely. No, anything for you, my man. I am actually very pumped to hear that you will be most likely joining us at the expo next year. So I'm very excited for that. Definitely. Oh my God, I love it. So no diss, you will be there.
I was gonna say at this point I can't, because then if I watch back this episode when I'm doing the best of for a later year episode, I'll be beside myself. I can't do that.
I love it. I love to see it.
All right, buddy. Well, I appreciate it. Have a good one.
Hey, thanks, man. You too.
All right.